Hello, everyone. This is Glenn Webb with Grand Circle New Music. Let me welcome you to our little composer chat this afternoon. I'm here with Steve Ricks, has written a piece for our concert. It'll be Friday, April 30th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, and you can tune into that on our YouTube page. Steve, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Glenn.
I'm delighted to have you here. You've written a piece that we actually commissioned from you a year ago, back before the pandemic. Tell us a little about that title. Background. Let's hear it from your words, not mine.
Okay, great. Yeah, the title ended up being Recreating Zion, and I put a little parentheses around the re part. Uh, and there were other working titles. I think Zion Nocturne was one of them, and some other things. But essentially, the commission that I got from the Dixie Department of Music for the DSSO and you and the three other soloists was supposed to be inspired by Zion National Park and in commemoration of its 100-year anniversary, right? So
Hmm.
that was kind of the initial inspiration and springboard for the piece. A more specific influence was some photographs by Dixie State University photographer Alex Chamberlain. And I didn't know him or his work, but I think it was you that recommended I maybe reach out to him or I look at his stuff. And so that was kind of fun. I did that, and he was very accommodating. And
Yeah,
so,
he's a great guy. He's
yeah,
associate professor of art and photography here at DSU on our campus, and great guy.
yeah. So he sent me several images that were just kind of inspirational. And so the first ones that really caught my attention is he has these really cool nighttime photographs, right? That have long exposure shots that have like a hoodoo in the foreground or different an arch, different formations, but then you can just see the Milky Way or the night sky very distinctly. And then he also has done this interesting thing with some of them where he's done time lapse photography and then sequenced them into these videos, right? Where you actually can see the night sky kind of cycling and the stars cycling through. And so that was like a really interesting, beautiful image, I thought. And so I originally was really taken with that. And I thought, oh yeah, I'll have this piece called Zion Nocturne and I'll focus on the nighttime. But then I think as my ideas kept evolving, it seemed a little too confining because I was just kind of going in other directions, and there were other photographs that kind of caught my attention. So basically, it ended up being this idea of basically just kind of going through a day in Zion National Park. And the idea of like starting out with sunrise and the sun just kind of barely hitting the mountains, and then working our way through the course of a day. And maybe during the day, there would be a storm of some kind. And then working our way to the nighttime and being able to see that night sky and everything in addition to the rock formations. And so that's kind of how it started and how it kept evolving. And by the time the piece is done, that's kind of the image I have for it. Like the overall form or shape of the piece, in my mind, there's kind of this program of starting with sunrise and going through into the night in Zion National Park. So
That's awesome. I'm reviewing the piece in my head as you're talking about it and thinking, yes, here's this, here's that, here's that. It's a blast to play. It's a bit of a beast to work on, but I guess that's what we ask for. So hey,
well, I don't know. I don't know if it's what you asked for, and certainly, I mean, with this weekend's performance, I'm really excited for it. But as I think you kind of hinted at in your intro, it's the quartet version of what originally was a piece for you four soloists and orchestra. And so you're probably even feeling extra weight because there were various licks and things in the orchestra part that I had to figure out a way to get into the piece, and that probably means more heavy lifting for you soloists.
Oh,
So
it's there's a good payoff for it though. But it's interesting to go through working on stuff and like, how come I don't know this passage? That must be something from the orchestra that's been dropped into my part for this revised edition. This is kind of a 20th, 21st century idea to reinvent your own piece. It's Have you done this type of work before? Create different versions of works?
absolutely, and I think there's probably some earlier precedents too, but yeah, I think for me, there are some models that where this is done in a very deliberate way. I mean, one that comes to mind are Luciano Berio, Italian composer. He has a whole series of sequenza pieces for solo instruments, and then he has a bunch of those transformed into these shaman pieces, which take that solo part pretty much as is and create a kind of you know ensemble accompaniment around it. So it kind of turns them into a concerto type thing.
Yeah.
So for this piece, it's kind of gone the other direction, and I've done it a couple other times where mostly with chamber music, but where I've had a featured soloist in a chamber setting. One of them is a piece, Dividing Time, right? It's a
Yeah.
percussion solo, and it actually was written originally as a solo, but then I kind of, in working with the performer that I originally wrote it for, Dominic Donato, he sort of suggested, hey, why don't you make a quartet version for the quartet I play with too? And so I can do it either way. I can do it solo or I can do it with the quartet. And so I did that. And I just think I've done that when it made sense or through possible throughout my career, just because it makes practical sense. It's like if I'm going to spend hours of time trying to come up with a piece that I think is okay and works and I want to put out there, it's always nice to get more mileage out of it, since sometimes you write a new piece, it gets premiered, and maybe that's it. So it's, if you can find a way to have it performed again, even if it's in another form, sometimes that's nice. So
I'm,
that's what
I'm
happened here, and I have to thank you and Grand Circle New Music for being willing to do this. I think don't tell anyone, but I think even before I wrote the orchestra piece, we talked about this a little bit, right? Like I was kind of like scheming, hey,
yeah,
it might be kind of
yeah. We're off the record right now, so
yeah,
yeah.
we're off the record. All right. Well,
Okay.
anyway,
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this idea of music it's not leftovers that you're repurposing because you still have that, but that you're creating your own contrafact to use in different places. That's fascinating stuff, Steve.
yeah. Well, it's a fun process too. Like I'm the kind of composer that probably I would keep tinkering with compositions as long as possible, like up until the last minute, or if a piece gets premiered and then gets performed again later, I might have one last look at it just to see if there's anything I can tweak about it. And so this is kind of a version of that.
Yeah.
And it's enjoyable. It's enjoyable to kind of imagine. It's almost like you could maybe compare it to translation or something too. It's like it's maybe not quite the same as translating languages, but it certainly is different going from a full orchestra plus soloist to just four people. And so that whole question of like, okay, what stays, what has to go, what part in the orchestra can I just not live without, and how am I going to get that into the piece
Hmm.
for these four players, but not get rid of other things. It's a fun but challenging process. So I was really happy to do it.
Yeah, nice to revisit those compositional choices, I guess, huh?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. So how does this piece, this quartet version, fit into your catalog? Is it representative of things you do, or is this a different direction? What's just kind of give us a little context of your overall work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess a, a general answer to begin with is just that it's kind of a mix. It certainly has things in it that show up in all my pieces, and that would probably, if somebody knows my work and knows other pieces I've done, will say, "Oh yeah, it's that kind of thing," you know.
Mhm.
Um, but there are also some elements which I feel like maybe are a little unique or different than what I do sometimes. So, I mean, I always try to pay close attention to color and to the timbre of the instruments I'm writing for, and find interesting ways that they can connect timbrally and sort of hand things off from one to another. And that's something that I think about a lot in chamber music. It's obviously something you can also do with orchestra. I just have had less experience writing for orchestra. But I think the opening of the piece, which is kind of meant to evoke sunrise, there's a lot of that where, there's you're bowing a crotale note, and then on that same note, Linda on viola comes in with a little tremolo on that same pitch, and so there are these little intricate kind of handoffs and things that I'm usually interested in and try to have happen. I also have to say that I've I've written a fair number of pieces where at least that have a kind of moto perpetual section. If there's a
That's what I was thinking. Um, I guess that energy that runs throughout your pieces, that you layer the lyricism on top of that.
Yeah, so I think I've become interested in more and more. I'll have pieces that'll feature a section or maybe a whole movement that'll just kind of give itself over to a kind of steady pulse and grid, and maybe a grid of like underlying subdivisions. I was doing this because this is Glenn, or the
Uh,
percussionist, doing
but
16th notes, digga digga digga
that's
digga
that's
on.
the hi-hat part you're modeling, I think. Yeah.
And so, and then sort of using that as the foundation that, you can layer these various patterns and other things over the top of it, or like you suggest, a kind of melody. So that shows up in any number of my pieces, and it's here too, for sure. Um, I guess if I could point to one thing that might be a little different, is I kind of feel like there in that sort of faster section, I gave myself over to these kind of sweeping melodies, which I kind of feel like are kind of cinematic almost,
Yeah.
and maybe even a little bit more tuneful than I might be more inclined to be. I mean,
Reflecting the landscape, maybe.
yeah, I think so. I think definitely I had all these things in mind. I had the fact when I originally wrote this piece, I'm writing it for orchestra, and I don't often have the opportunity to have a full violin section or string section playing a big melody. Also, yeah, the grandness of the landscape, and just trying to kind of portray a kind of big sweeping gesture over the top of the details of the steady pulse or rhythm. And so it's not that I don't have melodies in my music, but a lot of times I think they're a little more choppy and angular and faster moving. And in this case, they're kind of are longer and more sweeping kinds of melodies, which I think is a little bit different than what I do a lot of the time.
All right, wonderful, Steve. Thank you for joining us. We'll remind you, listeners, this will be Friday night, April 30th, 7 p.m. Mountain. It'll be on our YouTube page. Look for that link in the comments to this composer chat. Steve Ricks, Recreating Zion, 7 p.m. Friday. Thank you.
Hey, you bet. Thank you, Glenn.
You bet.